crazy time. Road to the White House. This is an old Mayfair game set in the 1980s, and I'm not going to explain quite why it's crazy, but I'm making some modifications to it. So, GDW, I think, made Campaign Trail, and I'm not quite sure what the timing is. I was introduced to this first, but Campaign Trail is basically a simplified version of Road to the White House. But Road is sort of the most detailed, generic U.S. election game that I've seen. Obviously, there are certain ones like 1960, which, geez, I don't even know where I have these hidden anymore. Well, Campaign Manager's down there. I don't know where 1960 is. I don't even know what kind of... Oh, there it is. Divided Republic, Bull Moose, which I have kicking around in a box over here. I kind of failed to hook up with the guy I was supposed to get that to. At CSW, I think I found out later who he was, but the first time I tried to get a hold of him, it wasn't the person I thought, and I was so embarrassed about it. I had trouble. I couldn't go up to people and start asking them, "Are you so-and-so? Are you so-and-so?" I figured he probably knows who I am, and he should have. Let's see. There's one other, and I'm looking for, which is Founding Fathers. Well, actually, there's two Founding Fathers, but the one that contains elections, but it doesn't specify on them. So we'll get away from that. Anyway, I have a real liking for political election games. I have a number of them that are kind of generic. Mr. President, that election down there, there's Landslide. I'm sure there are more that I have kicking around. But this is sort of the one that tries the hardest to do a simulation of the real process. And it doesn't take a specific time point, although it is kind of based on, say, the 1980s when it came out. And I don't know specifically which year. No, it came out in 92, which explains the existence. He would have been too young. Yeah, Ted Turner here. We also have Donald Trump in among these. And what they do is kind of, make a parody of the character, but they base a lot of it on what they think that person would be like. Now, this doesn't look like Donald Trump at all, but anyway, neither does the Ted Turner one. I guess they didn't want any kind of liability. Anyway. So the core to both this and Campaign Trail is that you move around from city to city, and each city has a number on it, and you score votes based on that number. That's the core design element. And I think this probably came later as an enhancement to it. This one has a lot more to it, though. And you record... Yeah, I have all kind of stuff because I'm doing weird things. You record the points that you get in those cities, and eventually they translate into winner-take-all primaries. Well, even at this point, winner-take-all primaries weren't an absolute thing, and nowadays it's actually a pretty rare thing. That is one of my enhancements, is that I looked through, and also the primary and caucus dates are totally different each year. They're not a set thing. They were kind of settled for a while, but not absolute. And so I actually filled out all the current electoral college votes, when the date of the primary is, or caucus, and that's actually followed up here, or started here, which can be used probably more usefully, and also a notation as to how it's going to be scored. And that's all part of my enhancements to the game. But part of this is because I kind of don't want to get to the rules, right? Because I haven't read the rules in a long time, but I think I can kind of give you the core of the game. So in the base game, you're dealt a candidate card, and he has a little description and a picture, and then he has some stats, which are broken up into where he's from, what kind of person he is, what's his charisma, how much money, and some positions, and then special effects, which usually come from stuff that is part of the jobs. Like if you're a businessman, you get certain special bonuses. Okay, that's great. And you end up recording if you have any starting votes anywhere, and I haven't done that yet for these guys. I haven't done that for all their starting votes. Okay. In particular, charisma has a special effect, which everybody kind of shares who has any charisma, which is if you move to a location based on the die roll you use to move, and this uses a roll and move system of a sort, but you have perhaps multiple dice to roll, and you roll equal to or less than their charisma, you get extra points in that state based on the charisma, based on the die roll and the charisma. Okay. Also included in the game, there's these, which are additional character sheets. They're the same characters with a little bit more information than simply the cards have. I don't know why they duplicate it. These are issue cards. Throughout the game, various issues come up. Now, unfortunately, because yes, I am translating it to the current Republican primary, which is the first time I've ever done this where I've taken this much change to the system, but also the first time where there were actually more candidates than I could reasonably play the game with. I've decided to settle on, I think, 6 candidates. I could go up to 8, but in my view, there were actually 9 or 10 still semi-viable candidates out there who haven't dropped out, and, poor Rand Paul and Chris Christie, and Kasich, for that matter, are not going to show up for this one. They just don't have the poll numbers. They're not going to make it to debates. Okay. So now at the beginning of the game, you take your candidate, and he's going to have this big person marker. And that's going to start in wherever his home location is. So, for example, Donald Trump is a New York State guy, so he would be allowed to start in New York State. I think there's some special rules for the first turn of play where you're allowed to delegate a die for movement but not move, but you may be able to do that anyway. Yeah, you can do that anyway, I think. Okay. After you set up the pawns that are on the board, at the beginning of each week, and the game is broken up into weeks, and we'll be modifying this as well, because the first primary comes in February. The first thing that happens is there's a potential for someone to raise an issue. Then each player takes a turn. They're allowed to spend some money, building up organizations, buying advertising, all kind of crap like that. And they can hold a fundraiser. Then the player rolls a number of dice equal to the number of pieces they have on the board that they can move with. And you have more than just your candidate. You also have these little guys who are your surrogates. And they last for a certain amount of time, and they'll be recorded on the turn track as to how far. You generally want to have surrogates on the board. They give you extra dice, which gives you more options. If you only have your main candidate, you're only going to roll 1 die, and then your movement may be limited by that. Of course, if you have some cash for flying around, that may change. Okay. So, at the beginning of each campaign week, before any player takes a turn, you determine whether or not there's room for additional issues. There's going to be a number of issues out that's based on the number of players. I don't remember. Yes. So I'm in a 5 or 6 player game, so there can be up to 3 issues outstanding at any one time in the game. If another one replaces it through a random event, it boots one of the issues off. But the candidates, if there's room for an additional issue, have the right to raise issues. And the person with the highest charisma has the first option to do so. Raising an issue is going to cost you money. I think it's just $1 to raise an issue. Yeah. And you pick that issue, you circle it on here, and that indicates nobody can raise that issue again for the first time. And you're only allowed, I think, to raise a number of issues equal to your charisma over the course of the game, if I recall correctly. No, you can only raise one issue per game. Okay. Then, if after everyone's had an option to raise issues, then each player may also, at the same time as they're given that option, instead revive an issue. Take an issue that has failed, that has already been played, and bring it back into play. Now, when you revive an issue, it doesn't have quite the same effect as the first time it shows up. And it costs you more. It costs you $2 to revive an issue. You can't revive an issue that you've raised. So if you already raised that issue once, you can't bring it back up. Someone else might. When each issue is raised for the first time, it'll have some automatic effects, which can be votes, etc. So for example, if we look at the abortion issue, the pro-life player gets, or any pro-life player gets plus whatever their rating is. And that rating is going to be recorded over here among the issues in Arizona, for example. And then, they might get penalties elsewhere in some cases. It's not always good to be associated with an issue, but it's usually issues are a positive thing that you can use to your benefit. But sometimes they can penalize you. And you try to avoid the places where, that hot button issue is not good for you. Okay. And when you bring an issue up, I think you roll 2 dice to see how many turns it lasts, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Okay. And that's assuming it doesn't get knocked out by something. All right. Then you take your player turn, and you'll be allowed to buy a number of things. Surrogate turns, advertising, organizing, polling, priority flights for your pawns, and dirty tricks. Each of these have their own roles. They're just a bunch of things that you can spend your money on at the beginning of the game. And each of the characters has a starting quantity of cash, which might be 0. And it's bad if it's 0. You can hold a fundraiser. Now this is one of the places where the game gets kind of weird, because fundraisers are kind of they're not passé. Candidates still were holding fundraisers, but dark money has kind of made fundraising not as important. You still need the hard money, as somebody like Scott Walker showed, and had to dive out of the campaign because he had tons and tons of PAC money, or super PAC money, but nothing, left to fund his campaign. And same with Perry. Okay. And you can do each of these things, and you pay money for some of them. So like holding a fundraiser, what you do is you have to be in a big city. You declare that you're not going to move, but you'll be using a die for movement. And then you roll dice to see how much money you get from the fundraiser, and that just goes into your cash flow. This is not a great thing to do. It wastes one of your candidates' turns, but sometimes you need cash, and you can't find another way of getting it. Starting a surrogate, you pay the cost of the surrogate, which I think is like $2 per turn, and you align him for how many turns you want him to stay on the board. You put the little counter where he starts, which I believe is going to be in your home state if it's not a special surrogate. And then you put this marker. So like if I was in February 1 and I started one that had 8 turns, well, he would last until the end of March 4. Okay. And that would cost me, I think, 16 bucks. I can buy organizations. Now, organizations are bought off of a chart here based on the size of the state in terms of electoral votes and the strength of the organization I want. They can go above strength 3. It just costs more, and there's a formula for determining that. What that organization says is every time something positive happens to me in that state, they spread the news, and it multiplies the value of whatever points I get there. So if I visit the state, and I have a strength 1 organization, which is times 2, I get twice as many votes. If I have a strength 3, which is times 3, I get 3 times as many votes. And I think they go up 0.5 for each strength. All right. Some of these others are not listed right here. We'll get to them when we get to them. Some of them are optional rules, like advertising. Advertising, essentially, you're allowed to pump a bunch of money into states, and it turns directly into votes. Polling, you're going to be allowed to ask everyone how many votes or how many points they have in a set of states, 50 electoral votes of states. I think it only costs you $1 to do this. And they all have to tell you the truth, and you're allowed to lie by, I think, like 5 or 10 points, something like that. We may not do much of that just because I'm soloing it. It's a pain in the butt. Okay. But it's really kind of a cool mechanism in the multiplayer, actually playing it with people. All right. Then after you've done, what you do, what you want to do for your turn, you roll a number of dice equal to the number of folks you have on the board. If you roll any 1s, you're going to draw an event card. And event cards tell you something. For example, this one pops up a new issue, poverty. And you'll roll the dice. And this doesn't matter whether it's, even if it's already happened, it can come back up. But it only has some of its effects the first time it comes up. Some of the other effects, like the first time effects, like the rating automatic. But some of them, like rating per stop in Utah, that exists as long as the issue is available. If there's already a full slate of issues out there, the one that's due to expire the quickest is just bumped away and it's gone. Which is one reason why maybe buying to get issues up is not always a great idea. But some characters really want to get an issue up there, and others maybe don't care so much. Okay. So anyway, you'll draw a card for each one. Some of them come, they'll give you endorsements and money and votes and stuff like that. Some of them are horrible things that happen to you. Generally, it depends on what your issues are. But some of them are like gaffes that just affect the person who draws them or whatever. Okay, then you have to assign your dice to each of your pawns. Now, if you went fundraising, you can assign any die to that pawn. Otherwise, the dice determine how far you move. Now, one of the things you're allowed to buy is a priority flight, which gets you, I think, from any size 4 city to any other size 4 city. You're taking a major commercial flight. Whatever. I don't know. It seems like if you're spending the amount of money that's involved in one of these flights, you probably should be able to get, even into minor airports, but whatever. So you have to assign each of your dice to one of your pieces, and that's how it's going to move. If you took a priority flight or fundraised, you still assign a die to that character. When you move along the lines indicated by the dice. So for example, if you get a 1 on a die, you can only move along a red line unless you bought a priority flight. On the other hand, when your main character, if he has charisma, moves into a new city, he uses the die roll, compares it against his charisma, and if it's not higher than his charisma, he scores that many extra points in the city. We already explained that, but okay. Then for each city you go to, you score points for it. So let's say I got these 2 1s and I took a red line. Wow, these kind of suck. I took a red line going to Hartford here, and you can see the board's going to get really crowded. And another one to New Haven. All right. Well, let's take a red line down here to Philadelphia. Okay. So the Hartford one's easy. I have 3 votes there. If I had a point of charisma or more with my character, I would collect 4, or 3 points there. I would collect 4 points in the state that's there, which is Connecticut. But it's not that simple. I have to worry about all the issues that are out and whether they affect my votes. Or also, some stances give you automatic votes for visiting a place for the first time and such not. And that's going to all be recorded on the character sheets. I haven't filled that out for my current crop of characters, but if we look at, here's a guy with a lot of stuff. So for example, he gets bonuses anytime he goes to Alabama, or she does, just because of, you know, some stances that she has. And that's the kind of thing I have to figure out when you create your own characters. You have to figure out what your character sheet looks like. She has a very complex character sheet. Most of them have significantly less, really. Okay. Now, with the surrogate here, he moved into Philadelphia, Camden. This is a double city. There are double and even triple cities. And what those say is you have 7 points to spend, but no more than 3 of them can be in the smaller portion. So 3 of the points are in New Jersey, up to 7 points are in Pennsylvania. So I could put 7 points in Pennsylvania, or I could put, 4 in Pennsylvania and 3 in New Jersey. Or anything that puts no more than 3 in New Jersey out of that. Your surrogate doesn't get any of your issue bonuses unless it's an issue-based surrogate. Sometimes an event card or an issue will give you a special surrogate who uses some of your ratings as though they're you. But in general, your surrogates just get the points scored for the city. Now, if you have an organization or something, whatever points you pump into that organization get multiplied by the organization's multiplier, as long as they're positive. Oh. And we have, some specifics here that I don't really want to go too much into, like how much do surrogates cost when you buy? How much does an organization cost? An organization, I explained it vaguely. Okay. At the end of the game, first for the basic game, what happens when you run out of the campaign season is you tally up the votes or points in each state, and winner takes all. They get that many votes. And then if you have, a large enough set of candidates that no one can win a majority of the electoral college, you drop the guy with the least votes, and whatever states he has, the second place person now gets the points. And if 2 people are tied in a state, they have a roll-off. So it's possible that you can just end up divided. Oh, something I forgot to mention. If you visit a state, I think it's 3 times, you automatically get a free level 1 organization there. A level 1, it's probably better to buy the organization if you've got any money, but sometimes some of the bigger states, like California, New York, it's worth bopping around in them, get that free organization, and score some points on that. But if somebody buys a big organization and throws down a lot of money, somebody with big corporate ties or something, they can usually buy those states out from under you. All right, what about the advanced game? So here's the basic game. Is a little bit more complicated than Campaign Trail, right? It's got these issues, it's got a few things you got to keep track of. The advanced game adds a little bit more to it. First thing it adds is the primary and caucuses schedule, which is that certain states have their election officially at certain times. Now, this is handled really poorly in my view. Here's how it works. If you get votes in that state within 2 weeks before the state is going to be showing up on the calendar, you'll get double the votes no matter how you get them, including advertising. You also get double the votes in the week of the election if it's a caucus state. If it's a bold state, it's a primary. And then on the week of the election, you get triple the votes. But no one wins the election at that point. And delegates who, even back then, were officially committed to a candidate by a state being won or lost, well, you could end up losing that state later if it was a close race or whatever. Now, that may be their way of handling some of the vagaries within, how different states handle things. I've decided to go for a little bit more detail than that, and we'll get to that when I discuss what I've set up. One of the other options, what comes along with this is federal grants. During February, you're going to get $1 each turn in federal matching grants. From March on, it depends on how well you did in the primaries and caucuses. Each primary, you have to reveal how many votes you have in that state, and 2 turns later, whoever had the most votes in that state gets an extra $3. Second most gets $2, and third or lower get $1. If you fail to get a positive value in the state, you get no matching money from that state. Caucuses are a little different. You announce whether or not you had positive values, and you'll get $1 for them. So they become less valuable to get and not as easy to get big votes in. As you can see, with things like Super Tuesday, you have lots of states at once, so it's very hard, to arrange your proper allotment to that state. It's very easy to try to compete in New Hampshire and South Dakota and Iowa and such not, and get there at the right time, maybe. There's still multiple states there. And if you get no votes in 3 primaries or caucuses in a row, you lose your matching grants. Now, you presume the sequence that is most disadvantageous to you, which is really bad in Super Tuesday, because if you fail to get into, say, 3 of those states, you've just lost your matching grants. You only get them again if you score first or second in 2 consecutive primaries, which is pretty painful, especially when there's a big lot of characters. One thing that's nice about that, though, is it at least gives you the bandwagon effect, and you can get knocked out of the game. Essentially, you could still blunder around and try to score some points. So, I don't know. Yes, here we are, creating a candidate. So, basically, various things: buying your charisma, your base position, who you are, like sitting vice president, senator, whatever, what state you're from. These things all, and some of the things like being a political unknown or a populist from any state is all the same value, whereas being a senator or governor, it depends on how big the state is. Now, there are states where there are real advantages, like being a small state governor who's next to big states. So states like Louisiana being next to Texas gives you a bonus because you have an organization and votes in that other larger state. An organization that might be expensive to get. Unfortunately, it won't be a very big one. And in fact, even your governorship organization won't be huge. It's only times 3, and that's as good as it gets to start. You can start off, you can commit points to money, which is really bad. And then you commit points, and there's this whole chart here for what different positions cost and ranks in those positions. Some of those positions don't really work well with the current situation. We're kind of playing the current... What I'm going to be doing is playing the current campaign with 1980s issues but a lot of other stuff from now, which is not going to work and give you anything. To give you an idea, the last time I did this, Alan Keyes won the Republican primary. But there I did something different. There I settled for what the game suggests, which is you have 1,000 points to create your dream character. Well, 1,000 points isn't a lot. Among other things, for example, 4 charisma, oh, I'm sorry, you have 1,200 points. 3 charisma costs you 1,000 points. So, or 4 charisma. So if you want a very charismatic character, you're not going to have too much else going for you. Giving everyone an even shot doesn't represent the reality. Some candidates are just better than others, and this time I've tried to assign them points to things and positions, and then I scored it, and I have, hey, this guy's worth this much. That's kind of bogus too, because if you give somebody a bankroll, it costs them a lot of points, but they're not really worth that much. Although early money can be useful. Okay. Some other special rules, and I'm not going to play with this one, is Spin Doctor, which allows you, let me see. I think what you do is you can spend, let's see. Each candidate has 300 points of Spin Doctor capability. And you can use these to raise the candidate's charisma, increase your war chest, or use the position tables to change your positioning. And you can do that in the moment. So like, if you're pro-oil and there's an oil spill, you can say, oh, we want to reverse our position there, or at least remove the big penalty that we're going to get. So you have these extra character points just sitting there ready to be used. I don't like that. I don't think it really adds much to the game. There's also rules for working the general election and even third-party campaigns, given that this was the age of Mr. Pirot. All right, so what have I done? It's complicated. So, and I alluded to much of it already. What I haven't done is made new issues, nor event cards, which is a shame because the world is significantly different than it was when this game came out. So the first thing I've done is I set up all the states, I figured out their electoral counts, and I divided them into 3 classes of states, and I figured out where their primaries and caucuses are. And this required some research online, which may or may not be completely correct. Some of them are still actually in the air, some of them I may have misdone. So, most states nowadays, especially in the Republican primary, which has specific rules regarding this, maybe the Democrats do too, I didn't look at them yet, are proportional. But after a certain date, states have been given the right to maintain winner-take-all mechanisms. So basically the idea is if you're an early state, you've got to go with proportional vote granting of some sort or another. If you're a later state, you have the freedom you used to have. So what I've done is I've simplified, because most states have their own rules that are very different. I've simplified into P, which is going to be completely proportional, but you have to break 10%, which is sort of the minimum that any state has, in order to get any of the points at all. And then any excess goes to whoever has the plurality of the votes. A P plus says if somebody gets a simple majority in that state of the points, they just get all the votes, all the votes from that state. Otherwise, we'll treat it as a P. W says it's always winner take all. And then H is going to be this hybrid form. This covers so many different weird types. But basically what I've decided is half the electoral votes go to a winner take all system, and the other half go to a proportional. That doesn't cover some of the really weird cases. Jeez, which one is it? Arkansas. Oh boy. But it's close enough, you know? All right. The other thing that I've done is I've created the characters. Now, I'm going to cover them when I actually start the game, because I haven't finished the character creation process. I've bought them where I want them, and what I've gotten is, when I figured out points for them all, Ted Cruz ends up with the highest point cost, because he's got a lot of issues that I associate with him with. I may not be very good on this. Sometimes, you know, I follow the debates and such not, but I don't really follow their advertising flyers and all their mailers, so it's hard to tell, and they're all kind of competing to some extent on the same space. So it's very difficult for me, you know, to say, well, you know, what do I do with, you know, 6 pro-life candidates? Well, I kind of give them, some of them pro-life ratings, and others I say, well, if you were running against a Democrat, yeah, you'd be pro-life, but you don't count in this field. It's not a major topic for you. So that's what I kind of tried to do, and you know, it's really my impression of them. And some of these stances are not pleasant sounding. Things like pro-tyrant. I don't know if anybody ends up with that, because that was a bigger deal back in the 80s when this game was being designed. You know, do you support Allende? Are you opposed to, you know, this? So that's kind of the thinking there. All right, but there are a couple of special cases that I've kind of put in here. One is dark money, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle that. But some of the candidates start off with some dark money, which I charge them the same as normal money for. And they can't use it for direct campaign things. They can't build organization. They can't take flights with it. But they can do dirty tricks, and they can do advertising with it. But it has other values. If you have dark money to begin with, you have the potential to get more dark money. Basically, business contributions are going to be matched with dark money. And I guess that's about it. There may be something else that I had as a match for dark money. But if you've lost your matching funds, you're out of dark money. You're not getting any more until you start getting matching funds again. Then there's internet funding, which a couple of characters have. And each level of internet funding is an amount of money you get each turn, just because you've managed to get out there and really push that. Now, internet funding is going to be kind of weird, because again, I'm going to put the same, if you fail to get matching funds, you lose that. You're no longer playing. For the internet funding until you recover them. I also want to figure out Trump. I've given him a pile of money because theoretically he has a lot of cash on hand. If he ever starts fundraising, he's got problems. Like, I think his charisma drops tremendously. I also don't think that he gets the businessman advantages for fundraising. So I've kind of made him a special businessman. Bush, he's a former governor and doesn't seem to have a big organization in Florida anymore. So I've made a lot of these little tweaks to the characters. Carson's on a book tour for all of December. I'm going to run this from December until the election time. For all of December, he's going to have the opportunity to use free flights every turn, but he has to go to different cities each time. And he can call it off at any point he likes, and then he just no longer has that advantage. All right, I gotta swap batteries. There's one more big thing that I changed over here, which is the elections. When delegates get assigned for a particular state, they are almost invariably dedicated delegates. There may be a few states that don't have those still, but what that means is if you win New Hampshire primary and you get X number of delegates, you have those delegates. They're in favor of you. They can't vote for anyone else until you are convinced to kind of drop out of the race. Now, this game doesn't handle super delegates at all. I don't know if I have one that does, which is a pity because they're an important factor, but we're going to ignore them. But this is how I'm looking at it. If you win a state and you get winner takes all, you get all the delegates for that state. If you get delegates from a state, they're committed delegates for you. You get those delegates. It's only when you drop out that we might reassess where those delegates go to. And those delegates are going to go by winner takes all, I guess. Because there's no real easy way to proportion somebody's bunch of delegates. And states are trying to cut deals at that point. So that is going to be my simplification for that. But it's strongly more complicated, or exceedingly more complicated, than the way Road actually handles it. It doesn't make a lot of sense, though, to just say, well, you no longer get any campaign value from that state. So if you've got committed delegates to you, that's fine and dandy. But if you have to drop out, effects that have taken place since the election can influence where those delegates end up going. And that's why you keep the scores in each state and keep them changing. It's probably not worth campaigning in those states any longer unless it's clear that somebody's going to drop out, and then you're maybe doing some schmoozing and stuff behind the scenes to get those delegates over to your side. Nobody can toss delegates towards someone else. That's a shame, but you know, it's not really something that fits with the flavor of the game, so that's fine. I'll go into the specifics of the characters when I get them going, and then we'll get started on this. And I'll load this up now. Oh, I'm going dancing, so I don't know when I'll actually get to finishing the prep work and playing. I doubt that I'm going to do the Democratic primary as well. Ideally, what I do is actually run the two, like if they were both small primaries, I'd run the two primaries simultaneously. They can't conflict with each other, but the same issues would be coming up because the same things are being discussed. Now, the truth of the matter is we're such a divided nation that, yes, the issues that the news brings up come up for everyone to some extent or another. But the issues the characters bring up from the different parties actually don't conflict too much. So it would be really hard to do it that way. I've played that way before, where I have them running simultaneously and just allow, you know, both parties to bring up their issues. This may actually be just fine. And then after I run the two primaries, then I run the general election. I doubt I'm going to do that, although it would be interesting to try to figure out how to rate, you know. So another thing that's going on here is with the characters that I created, these guys already have huge popularity bases, you know, within all the states. They all have their following, right? That's not taken into account in this game at all. And it never has been. And that's kind of a, wow, that's weird, you know? There's no sort of, hey, you know, there's just like votes scattered all over the place for someone. There's nothing like that. So we're at kind of the baseline point, and I'm going to start in December rather than February. There's not going to be matching funds until January. And then, you know, we'll see what happens. All right, let's send this up.